What I'm trying to say is we all have finite resources. Every SEO team, every developer team, every organization has only finite resources. So we have to pick and choose which area we tackle. And in most cases, a website offers a lot of avenues for action, right? So there can be technical solutions that can be improved, or technical setup, the infrastructure and architecture, the content on page, the backlink profile can be reviewed, risks mitigated, a lot of avenues. But it does make a difference what we prioritize.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It's my pleasure to have Kaspar Szymanski back with us. He was on the show a few years ago. It's awesome to have him back. He's a renowned SEO expert, a former senior member of the famed Google search team, and very few former Googlers with extensive policy driving, web spam hunting, and webmaster outreach expertise. Nowadays, Kaspar applies his skills to recover websites from Google penalties and to help clients to grow visibility of their websites in search engine results. Kaspar, it's great to have you back.
Stephan, it's a pleasure to be on the show again.
Let's talk about what's keeping you up at night, or something's changed in the SEO world, in the discipline of SEO, and it's something that you're working on and you're concerned about, your clients are concerned about, something that may involve AI perhaps, or may involve changes in Google policies or in the technology that Google is applying to eliminate spam. What's concerning you these days?
I'd like to get across a couple of things that really are very much on my mind. And Stephan, you did mention AI. AI is kind of like the new trend, the new favorite topic of a lot of colleagues. I'm fond of AI. Personally, I consider current developments maybe more a language model than anything else, and it's probably more applicable in some languages than others. It's a great tool. It's a fantastic tool to automate where automation is warranted. At times, I'm surprised how much enthusiasm is being poured into something that that takes a few minutes, a task that takes a few minutes, and really the AI solution is being produced in several weeks' time, and that may be at times a little bit of an overkill, but it is true, it is accurate that AI can be a phenomenal solution, and it has been. Automated solutions have been around for a long time, especially in the area of content. Content can be written words, can be editorial, but data can be content. So it wasn't called AI. There was really no AI behind it, but automated solutions were in place, and they were both usable, applicable, useful for the users in the context of the user journey in the respective vertical on the respective website. But that's really not so much what's keeping me up at night, if we may talk in these terms. I have a couple of favorite topics. I would love to talk about server logs. This is where a lot of potential lies for pretty much every single large website out there. We can park that for a moment. I recently dealt with the questions around pros and cons around website consolidation. So let's say you happen to have 1, 2, or 3 websites or more websites. How do you go about it? Do you keep them? Do you run them separately? I'd love to talk about that when the time allows. But the one thing that recently has been very much on my mind is SEO priorities. And that may be not a popular topic. This is not something that is on everybody's mind these days. But I realize something that is really rather concerning, because I don't think that in an awful lot of cases, resources are applied in the most impactful way. What I'm trying to say is we all have finite resources. Every SEO team, every developer team, every organization has only finite resources. So we have to pick and choose which area we tackle. And in most cases, a website offers a lot of avenues for action, right? So there can be technical solutions that can be improved, or technical setup, the infrastructure and architecture, the content on page, the backlink profile can be reviewed, risks mitigated, a lot of avenues. But it does make a difference what we prioritize. Currently, recently working with a client who was very well positioned to do well. However, they were very much concerned about their URL structure. And in this particular instance, and this is a very common question and very representative of the topic, they were really keen on having the right type of keywords in the URL, which is fine to have. However, if you don't have them, making that changing the URL structure is a huge undertaking. where a lot of can go south and fluctuations are to be anticipated. And it makes exactly zero difference for SEO. Because whether you happen to have that particular keyword that you care for in the URL structure or not is of no consequence for the ranking whatsoever. Google doesn't care one way or the other. So whether we have private health insurance in the URL or whether we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the URL, it doesn't make any difference. And this is just one example. In another instance, the question really was, can we have a hard rule how many links, how many internal links we would have per page? And we can have that hard rule, but that hard rule, unless it's completely out of proportion, unless it says, we need to have a couple hundred links, is really of little consequence. The more important thing is we don't want to have orphan pages. And this is rather basic SEO if you think about it, but it's really not so much what the discussion is about. Is this a priority? Now, in comparison to, for instance, managing the crawl budget, or in comparison to having the canonicals set up correctly, these action items, while they can be legitimated, this is something that can be done, they pale. If you're asking what keeps me up at night, it is not only providing the right kind of answer to complex questions, but also making sure it is absolutely clear we have to focus on where the impact is largest. And an awful lot of times, this takes a lot of convincing, because of course there are already to-do lists, there are already plans within large organizations. They don't necessarily overlap with the findings that are more current, because large organizations tend to take a little bit of time before they introduce those changes they planned a while ago.
How important, how impactful is content pruning and managing that crawl budget, if you had to prioritize that versus other typical SEO issues with regards to identifying better keywords to target, link building, fixing other technical issues? Where would content pruning go?
I love that question because it allows me to talk about the topic I'm so fond of. In a nutshell, the honest answer is you can't tell hypothetically, because every website is different, right? If you happen to have a one-pager or a website that is a couple of hundred pages large, crawl budget isn't really an issue. So let's assume for a moment we're talking about a substantially large website. Let's say 10 to 50 million landing pages, something around, substantially large. Crawl budget is critical. And the reason why I'm saying this is because it doesn't matter much what we change on the website, whether it's the content or the technical solutions, whatever it is, even if it's pure optimum, if the content is really phenomenal, it won't make a difference. If the crawl budget isn't there, because Google will take too long, potentially months, even longer, to realize there are changes that have been introduced. So crawl budget in the case of a large website can be absolutely critical. But again, this is not a silver bullet. This is not a solution that is applicable to every single situation. For instance, another website, large or small, if the canonicals are an issue, if the canonicals are being paired with no index unintentionally, this is of course a huge, huge problem. If another website in a very competitive environment happens to be, say, a legacy backlink profile, I'm calling that legacy backlink profile, but we know what we're talking about, right? There has been some link building that Google may frown upon, has been done over time. These tend to mushroom as time passes. And out of blue, we have 100 million backlinks that are, let's say, not exactly squeaky clean as far as Google would be concerned. This can be a huge liability, because overnight that can trigger a penalty. And that penalty, if left to linger, it's going to drag us down, but it's also going to prevent us from improving the site, because any release, any better structure, any better technical setup, any new content will be impaired in its ranking as long as that penalty isn't fixed. What I'm trying to say, it really is individual. I like to compare the situation that we're talking about here right now a little bit to driving a car. Again, I'm from the I grew up in southern Germany, so you may expect some examples from the automotive industry, right? There's Mercedes, there's Porsche. So I'm comparing this to a situation where you have a nice car, right? A website, a vehicle that generates revenue is slightly comparable to a car in the sense that you have to maintain it. Now, before we are going on vacation with the family, I always bring the car for a checkup. I want to make sure that the fluids are up to par, the tire pressure, brakes, lights, you name it. These things are important for the road ahead. And the website is comparable. You have to audit, you have to check it on a regular basis. Of course, not on a monthly basis, but more or less every other year, or every year, depending on what the budget allows. It is important to realize what's out there. What is Google seeing? What are other search engines? I'm a big fan of Bing. I don't think Bing should be neglected here because it's another source of organic traffic. So what are the major search engines seeing? What kind of signals are they detecting? And how can we improve them based on current technology, not the technology from maybe a year ago or 2 years ago?
Given things have changed quite a lot in the last several years, the advent of AI being used for content farms and for nefarious link building and all sorts of crazy things. Like, what's the sort of risk that a website owner has these days in terms of, let's say, negative SEO attacks and algorithms misidentifying his or her site as spam? What's the risk these days?
Without painting a grim picture, without scaring people, the risk is there. It has to be said that algorithms are being fine-tuned on a regular basis. But if algorithms worked perfectly, and particularly Google algorithms, if they worked perfectly as intended, there would be no link building. Yet still it exists as a perfectly working industry, a very large industry, matter of factly speaking. So algorithms are not large-scale solutions, but at times they do not get it right. I don't think the risk for legitimate businesses is particularly large. Yes, it can happen, but most of the time it's something that can be avoided. Avoidable situations where signals are unintentionally impaired, may that be by content that is dated or maybe entirely outdated. A very common example is, and one I'm particularly fond of because I see that happening a lot of times, is when the notion that more landing pages is better is being introduced as a policy. That frequently leads to a situation where filtering is being opened up for indexing. Now, whenever we do that, let's say there is a website that has products that are available in different varieties, different solutions, different colors, when you name it, every single variation becomes a separate URL. So that, of course, totally boosts the total volume of landing pages, but it also requires a new crawl budget. Now, in a particularly competitive environment, we work a lot, for instance, in the retail or the travel industry. In both those industries, very competitive industries, if you're not just competing against the other players in the market and against your primary competitors, but you're also competing internally. URLs, your landing pages are competing against each other. There is a lot of cannibalization going on. So I'm talking about situations where algorithms don't necessarily mistakenly detect signals and read them poorly. It's most of the time situations that are unintentionally being created by the website operator, the website owner. And the consequences at times are dire. One of the favorite articles that I ever penned for Search Engine Land was SEO horror stories. And these are particularly grim stories. This is the kind of worst case scenarios that you can think of. These happen, but it's not the norm. I don't think it makes really an awful lot of sense for website operators to be particularly worried about that. If, looking from their vantage point, I think it's much more important to focus on the one thing that is absolutely critical to the long-term success of the business and the website as well, and that is the unique selling proposition. This is a term that is being highlighted, even tossed around a little bit by Google every now and then. John Mueller, former peer at my time when I was back at Google, mentioned that as well quite recently. But it is something that is important to understand, to make sure that the one thing that the business is really stands out for, be that a community, be that the pricing, be that the best selection, be that a product that is completely unbeatable, that this is something that is being clearly communicated, that the users understand it. And that also means simple things as the snippet representation. Because, at times, even businesses with a unique selling proposition don't really have the kind of brand recognition that they could be having. And this is something that, of course, impacts CTR and user signals, because if I don't recognize the brand of the landing page that is ranking for the query I'm currently looking at, I'm less likely to click on it. And this is one more reason why it's so important, if you happen to have that unique selling proposition that is clearly defined, to make sure to tell the user, this is the reason why you want to come to us, and this is the reason why we are better, different, more interesting. There is, of course, another way of kind of ensuring success, if you want, because in some industries, a unique selling proposition is a challenge. That is a given, of course. Take, for instance, the affiliate industry, which is quite competitive. And an area where your website happens to be let's say, more or less similar. The offer seems to be more or less similar as in comparison to your competitors. There is one thing that you can be doing, and this almost certainly will give you the upper hand, the higher rankings, and that is performance. All other signals being roughly the same. If the website loads faster, Google loves that website more. And the reason is not because Google cares for that website particularly. No, it's because users prefer faster loading websites.
Yep. So what are you doing to optimize your client sites for faster loading? Are you actually implementing some optimizations like to the JavaScripts and CSS and the HTML templates and whatever other technical implementations you're recommending? You're actually implementing them too?
We don't. We are a pure SEO consulting business, if you want. When I'm saying us, I'm primarily referring to the other co-founder, Serge Brother. And I believe also somebody that you had already the opportunity talking to, Philly Wiese, the giant Dutchman, and hands down, the best SEO out there. I'm very confident saying that. We don't do actual implementations. We work with clients, with their teams. We address questions how they can do it. But working with large organizations, the situation that, and you might empathize with that, frequently the situation is one where we happen to have a lot of stakeholders, a lot of vested interest in large organizations with a larger group of people where expectations have to be mitigated and there are more in-depth and longer discussions. Where our job frequently really is to clearly outline, this is the signals we're currently seeing, this is where we can be in order to get there, this is what needs to be done. Now, within your framework, given the acumen of the team that is currently in place, let's look what can be done, but we don't actually implement the changes that the client would in fact implement based on the recommendations, pending their approval, of course.
So do you have somebody that you recommend to do the implementation for page speed optimization, or you just try and coach them through it and hope they implement that well?
Most of the time, the latter, to be honest. We do at times recommend third parties, but this is on very case-by-case basis, especially something that we don't do. Say there is within the request or within the collaboration that we happen to be having, and there is an inquiry with regard to paid search, which we don't do at all. Even though Philly has some expertise in the field, he used to work in that area as an engineer. In these cases, we would pass on the inquiry to a trusted partner. Sometimes they are former Googlers as well. There is really a handful of people where we have the necessary insight, if you want, in order to gauge the quality of work being delivered and the work ethics. I think this is really also important in our industry. You may have had an experience where a client says, I did not get what I was hoping for from an engagement, and I happen to be disappointed. I think it's very important, because we're such a small industry, to have high standards in terms of work ethic and in terms of living up to expectations. So in some cases, we do recommend third parties, but most of the time we really stick to what I believe, are best at, and that is literally technical SEO. So crawling a website and a multitude of tools, including our own proprietary tools, reading the signals, comparing those signals against each other, understanding what they mean, really digging into the code and translating this to actionable advice.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of those proprietary tools? What do they do?
Proprietary ones that we have, these are not public tools. In fact, little known, Philly used to be a lead developer at Google Search. Now, what Philly had been coding and developing at Google, these tools we could not possibly take with us as we left the company to start Search Brothers. But of course, we were at liberty to retain Philly's brains. So we rebuilt tools that mimic this kind of experience, being deployed on a much smaller scale, much more boutique scale, of course, not on a global level, but really for the benefit of individual clients. Unfortunately, I have to say, none of these are public. We have contemplated that idea a while ago. However, we are in the lucky situation that we tend to be in demand. I have to say that as well. We never got around to do that. And I think for the time being, this is the situation that it's going to be like that for the foreseeable time. Simply put, there is just too much demand for qualified answers to SEO questions. And we are addressing that need primarily.
So when you say these tools aren't public, well, I understand they're proprietary, but are they also secret? So you can't even tell prospects that you're talking to that you have a tool that does X, Y, and Z, and it's just not a feature that's available in any of the enterprise SEO tools?
Oh, no, and we can talk about that most certainly. We have our own crawlers, of course, that's to begin with. We also crawl backlinks, so not just the websites, but also backlinks. If I may recommend some third-party tools just to give our listeners, our audience, an idea which direction we're coming from. We utilize commercial tools as well, so there will be DeepCrawl, aka Lumar nowadays, OnCrawl, Screaming Frog, multitude really of tools that we tap into as data sources. We use these as crawls next to our own crawlers. We do parse server logs. And server logs is a separate topic. Happy to talk about that. One of my favorites. But when a client actually is in a position to provide server logs covering an extended period of time, that's a treasure trove of data, and we parse those as well. And there is, of course, tools that we utilize in order to filter and sort backlink profiles. Some of the larger clients we work with have their backlink profiles in the billions rather than in the millions. These are, of course, substantial enough. So while investigating those and factoring also the anchor text, the quality of the websites and so forth, it is important to pre-filter and to find common patterns within the data available. And that's something we do as well with the tools that that are quite internal indeed.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious why you didn't mention Botify. I don't use it personally.
It totally slipped my mind. You are absolutely right, and both a huge fan of the tool as well of the Botify team. We have the privilege of working closely together, and Botify is indeed one of my favorite. Among a handful of favorite, there's Majestic, there is SEMrush, there's Ahrefs, and I'm probably forgetting still a handful. And these are all great tools. And on top of those, and I really want to mention that as well, is Google Search Console, which provides the insight. Data are, of course, just samples, but this is the insights in a way how Google reads SEO signals of a website. And we do not want to forget Bing Webmaster Tools, because yes, the market share tends to be rather small in some areas. Germany, some people say around 5%, but it is yet another major search engine and yet another opportunity to tap into more data. So why not utilizing it?
But if 95% of the organic traffic is coming from Google, and let's, for the sake of argument, say it's 5% coming from Bing, isn't it kind of like the 80-20 rule? You focus on the 20% that is going to deliver 80% of the outcome or the value. And if you monkey around with stuff that's not really a big needle mover, it's best 5% of the traffic, or just the organic traffic, what maybe, what's the point?
You're absolutely right with regard to 80-20. You do want to focus on wherever is the bigger bang for your buck. But Bing, those 5%, and for the sake of the discussion, let's stick to the 5%. That 5% can make a tremendous difference, because 5% of 100 visits isn't really much, but 5% of 50 million visits is quite a lot, especially if they're converting. It's not to be rejected easily. If we think about it for a moment, if Google traffic weren't forthcoming, and this is something that can happen with or without the website operator's wrongdoing, if Google traffic weren't forthcoming, we might be very grateful for those remaining 5%, which will constitute then whatever traffic is still out there. But to answer your actual question, your real question, why does Bing matter? Why does Bing Webmaster Tools matter? Not so much in order to optimize in any different way for Bing. Matter of factly speaking, if one were to optimize for Google, this tends to work really well for Bing as well. But it's a data source. It's different types of data. It's different type of samples, and it's free of charge. We can tap into it at no charge whatsoever. So why not doing it, given that data is really the key in order to optimize in an awful lot of cases. And in cases of large websites, it is the key, most definitely.
So can you give an example where you worked with a client and you found something in Bing Webmaster Tools that wasn't visible, or you didn't get the information from Google Search Console or from third-party tools?
Oh, certainly. Backlinks. That's a very good example. It's a very good question indeed, because backlinks, no matter where we're looking, these are mere samples, right? So it's never about an individual backlink. It's not that one backlink. And we're not going to point fingers right now, within this recording, talking about which backlinks are particularly prone to be triggering undesirable attention on Google's part. It's never about that one backlink. But the larger the sample, the easier it is to understand what was happening in the past. If we're talking about a large old website? Are there start pagina's, Dutch directories that are still lingering around from mid 2000s? Is there something else? Is this PR? Is this, is this something that was conducted around 2010, 2015? Or is it something else entirely? The idea really here is to understand the general trends in order to address the risks. So backlinks and backlink samples, which take quite a while if the backlink profile is large in order to collect the critical mass, is a very good example where you want to tap into the highest number of sources. Even if the samples are overlapping, you can normalize these. You can have a sample that is as close as possible to what Google might be utilizing as a backlink profile, and only then really in a position to say, these and those patterns tend to be problematic. This is something where we want to be careful, not necessarily disavow straight away, at times yes as well, but where you are in a position where you can actually gauge the risk levels.
Yep. And I presume that you are disavowing not just in Google Search Console, but in Bing Webmaster Tools.
Yes, but I'll be very honest with you. Most clients are primarily focused on Google search. I also have to say that it is rare for a client to say, I want to focus our efforts on Bing.
Right. But if you're putting together a disavow file, it would make sense that you would take the few minutes to upload it to Bing Webmaster Tools.
Across board, indeed.
And so what would be an example of something that you found through Bing Webmaster Tools for a client, let's say relating to backlinks and the quality of those, and then you took some action and got some result? What would that example be?
This is actually an interesting question because, let's say for a moment, hypothetically speaking, we're looking at a client that has a hard time ranking for a particularly relevant query. Again, I'm from Germany, so let's say it is private health insurance, one of the most popular queries in Germany, most competitive if you want. Let's say for a moment, the client has a really hard time ranking for private health insurance, as being the desirable query, desirable anchor. Anchor being the key here, because if that's the question, if that's the issue, we would certainly look into the backlink profile on a holistic level. We would look on, of course, on the landing pages as well. Are they fast? Do they provide the actual service that is desired? Does it actually say private health insurance? But another step is certainly looking into what's the anchor text distribution? And this is something that is not being discussed enough out there. If the anchor text distribution is overwhelmingly commercial, so let's say the top 10 anchors that are identified are all commercial, that is really close to a smoking gun as far as Google is concerned, right? Now, let's say for a moment that private health insurance is among those top 10. The next step is, of course, to look into where do these originate from? Do they all look identical? Does a large chunk of those look like press releases that mushroomed? First, they were, of course, released to begin with over the press release wires. Then they mushroomed. So the same type of article, which tends to be a rather short article, was the exact match query, is the exact match anchor text that says private health insurance is all over the place. That is the exact reason why. Of course, Google detects those things. Those algorithms we discussed prior, they may not be perfect, but they are quite capable to detect what is a commercial anchor text and a commercial query and match those two together. So this would be a very good example where more samples would be actually very, very conducive, very beneficial in order to understand why does not a website that arguably can rank for a commercial query, why it doesn't rank for that query in particular.
Yeah. And do you find when you're working with clients that there are page level penalties and keyword level penalties and site-wide level penalties and maybe other types of penalties that are a combination of some of these, like at a keyword and a page level? How do you diagnose when those are the case?
In a nutshell, yes to what you just described, to pretty much all of it. Again, this is a topic close to my heart. I've been writing for a long time on that topic, on understanding really what algorithms are, how they fare against manual spam action. That's the euphemism being utilized for penalties, really. What the differences are, how to tackle those. To address your question initially, initially, yes, real penalties can be actually quite nuanced, and they frequently are. The idea really being to tackle the behavior that Google deems to be outside Google Webmaster Guidelines, to be really a violation, but leave the rest of the website where it is, leave it ranking, not really applying a very vindictive approach if you want. In these instances, let's say for a moment we happen to have an isolatable pattern that demonstrates doorway behavior, right? This is the kind of pattern that would be then indeed typically selectively tackled and either removed altogether or maybe ranking very, very poorly. We already discussed a case where there is excessive anchor texts that are commercial in nature and where the links are clearly identified as spam. That website would most likely not rank for that particular term, either individual landing pages or the entire website altogether. What we see also quite frequently is where websites are being tackled in a multitude of ways because they indeed demonstrate a multitude of violations. So there are doorway pages, there are lean content pages, and they're buying links very, very obviously, or from Google's vantage point, very obviously, and they're disseminating links that pass anchor text, which can be considered, let's say, very unlikely to be, merit-based. And these websites are, of course, tackled for that violation as well. Most of these websites never make that public, right? So if we were to talk to the largest media outlets, be that in the US or Germany or wherever else, none of them would really admit that the links that they are offering, those page rank passing links, that those links really aren't really worth much in terms of page rank. For the very simple reason, it's because those pages, those websites are being detected by Google as selling links, as selling page rank passing links, and being tackled and being highlighted as such in Google Search Console, but they don't make that public. Now, it's a wide topic because on the other hand of the spectrum, we also have algorithms, and Google penalties are most easily to be distinguished from each other. If there is a Google Search Console message that says the website has been penalized, that's actually a manual spam action, aka a penalty. If there is no such information, yet the website seems to be nosediving in traffic, nosediving in organic search, that's an algorithmic issue, but it's not a penalty. Best comparison really is to looking at a navigational app, right? If you want to go from A to B, you get the best route. If you pick and choose a different route, that's just different signals, but it's not like you can't get there. You're just slower getting there. And whenever websites take a nosedive and traffic unexpectedly, typically there is a good reason for that. Be that a Google algorithmic update where the calculation method has changed, or be that something that was actually changed within the website quite recently. If you happen to open the staging server of several million landing pages for indexing, that's going to dilute your backlinks, your content on technical signals. We see that happening quite a bit. The staging server should not be open for indexing, yet it happens, right? Content application becomes a huge issue.
Yep. And so these are cannibalizing the main production site.
Yes, and very often when there is a staging server, there will be an awful lot of placeholder content or content that really wasn't, it wasn't meant for users or for indexing. It was just, let's write something here because we need the landing page for testing. All of that becomes available for indexing, for crawling and indexing and ranking. Of course, it's going to spoil user signals as well, because users, whenever they experience those landing pages, they're going to take a look at it and be like, that's not what I was looking for. I'm going to go back. I'm going to refine the query. I'm going to look for something else. And with their behavior indicate to Google isn't a great experience. So, of course, that's going to, down the line, that's going to have an impact, a negative impact on the rankings. Again, it's not intentional, but it happens. And most of the time, the moment when it's being noticed, when it's being realized, is really when it's a little bit too late, because let's face it, Google Search Console data, there is a lag, right? There's a lag when Google Search Console data is being populated. So when we notice the dip, it's kind of already a little bit too late. Not too late to fix it, but it's going to take some work.
Yeah. All right. So what are some of your favorite success stories where you identified, let's say, a penalty or a technical misconfiguration and changed their whole business, saved some some jobs and catapulted somebody's career, et cetera, et cetera?
One of my favorite stories of all time is a real estate business. I would allocate them in the small and medium businesses area. We worked, I think, 3 or 4 years in a row. And after the third year, work wasn't discontinued. It was concluded because as a developer, as a real estate developer, the guys run out of stuff to sell. They sold everything. Now, the real estate business, given over times, it's not particularly difficult to be optimized, because it's in demand. But this was a couple of years back, and this was really a heartwarming story where we kind of temporarily lost a client, but we gained their fullest confidence. And of course, they were happy enough that they kind of sold out all the merchandise they had. When we talk about some penalties, we had, of course, plentiful of opportunities to fix penalties. When that's being done, when penalties are about to be lifted, it is, in my book, most critical to get it done right at the very first instance. And the reason for me saying this is because this is a collaborative effort. It's not just the consultant providing the right kind of data, the right kind of solution, including the rationale, the consideration request rationale for Google, one that makes sense. That too. But it is critically important that the client, the website operator, also plays ball. Meaning, lifting a link-related penalty only makes sense if we actually disavow whatever happens to be the reason for the penalty, without the idea or the notion to instantly revoke the disavow file or remove the disavow file subsequently, because that penalty is most likely to be reintroduced. And when we're dealing with a client that happens to be suffering from a penalty that is related to their content, so a thin content penalty, it is critically important to understand the nature of their entire network. And the reason for me saying that is, if you happen to have a network of 50 or 100 or even more websites, and they all look and feel the same, and they all tap into the same database, it is most unlikely for Google to look at your consideration request with a favorable eye, because those websites, they are very, very unlikely to provide a unique selling proposition. As far as Google is concerned, this is really just templated content, spam content if you want. So it's important to work together. I want to say that if that collaboration is a given, if there is full transparency mutually both ways, penalties can be fixed. It's not a problem. Technical issues can be fixed. The one thing that has to be kept in mind is that sometimes it takes a little bit longer than expected. Because, for instance, in terms of backlinks, if we happen to have 100 million backlink profile, we need to crawl those backlinks first to understand what we're having. If we're changing something on the website that tackles a technical issue, those landing pages needs to be crawled first. So crawl budget becomes a really, really important issue in this the discussion. Which brings us to my favorite topic, which are server logs. And if we still have time, I would love to talk about that, because I think there are some tangible, some real takeaways for our listeners. The reason for me mentioning server logs is because whenever I go to a conference, and I go to conferences to share and to speak about SEO on a very regular basis, it's a real privilege to travel around and talk to cool people. I ask the audience, how many of you guys are aware that you save and preserve your raw web server logs? The answers vary, but most of the time I would say about 10% say yes, we go ahead and save and preserve server logs. And I also want to say not every website has to do that, because some websites are literally very small, so it can be beneficial, but it's not going to be enough data to really draw any actionable conclusion. When we're talking about large websites, having server logs collected over an extended period of time makes a huge, huge difference. For instance, we can understand which parts of the website are being prioritized by Google, and then compare. Are these the types of landing pages that we actually want to be crawled and indexed and ranking, or as time passes? Or is it something else altogether? Or is it the FAQ part, or is it the wiki pages or is it the blog that is only supplemental? The most basic finding, there's of course HTTP responses. So are we responding with 200 OK with actual 200 OK pages, or are our responses 5xx responses? Or are we actually saying 200 OK for soft 404? So actual error or expired content or expired products landing pages. All of these things can be much better identified if we happen to have server logs. Now, server logs that have not been recorded can never be retrieved, and this is very important. So if I may share a piece of advice for our listeners, something that you can consider a takeaway and maybe implement within your organization and benefit from it as time passes, go ahead, save and preserve your web server logs. And given our past experience, there will be two obstacles frequently. One being the legal team saying, oh, that might not be legal. Yes, it is. You're only saving and preserving server logs that pertain to bots. You are not understand what bots, which kind of landing pages are being requested by bots. We're not talking about users, so only bots. And the other question, the concern being raised is, oh, it's going to be so expensive, but it's not. Luckily, even though everything is getting more expensive, hard drives are not really that expensive, and server logs can be zipped, they can be compressed. It's not going to be a huge drain on the budget. If you happen to embrace that recommendation, in 6 months or a year from now, you'll be sitting on a treasure trove of data. Please make sure to factor it in when you conduct an audit. The findings will be much more precise, and you'll be able to actually pinpoint those landing pages that are your cash cows, in order to make sure that you put your best foot forward, even in the most competitive environments.
But when I heard some of the use cases for server log analysis, like identifying when 404 errors, what error pages are returning a status code of 200, these different use cases, you can identify without the server logs.
Yes, but you will never have the full picture. You can identify it, but you won't be able to say which bits and pieces of the website are actually being prioritized. Or you can also not identify which kind of bots are actually crawling my site. Are these scraper bots? Are these Google bots and Bing bots? This is all the kind of insight that is only possible with having server logs. I give you that. There is a certain level of technical acumen that is required in order to actually take advantage of that data. Not every organization is large enough to justify that cost, but then you can collect and save and preserve that data. And if it's 2 years of server logs that are being ultimately utilized when audit is happening, that's perfectly fine. But it really is an opportunity lost if these server logs are never being recorded, because again, there's no way whatsoever to recover that data. It is lost for eternity.
What tool are you using for the server log analysis? Is it Screaming Frog's log analyzer?
Among others, and we have our own solution as well, but Screaming Frog is a very good one indeed.
OnCrawl has a log analyzer as well.
They do. Big fan here. I believe it's a French company that is offering OnCrawl. And we're very keen with OnCrawl as well. The idea really is, and this is something that maybe warrants a little bit of explaining, why utilizing a multitude of tools. Well, of course, the results are not 100% overlapping, but at times one result stands out. And whenever that's the case, either there is a false positive or you're actually finding something that the other tools omitted, which can happen, And the functionality of the tools that we utilize isn't identical either. Sometimes you can actually pinpoint what you want to be crawling. Sometimes it's not possible. You can tab crawling. You can make sure that it's not excessive. In cases where there is, for instance, filtering open to crawling, you can crawl frequently forever, but it's not necessarily the kind of data that gives you additional information. So the reason for using a multitude of different tools is really to have this opportunity to double check findings and to look for the outliers and that are out there. Something that I would recommend, it is also something that takes time, and this is where server performance, or generally hoster, is also a factor. The hosting service, it's times when crawling, you have to be careful not to impair the actual user traffic, right? This is something that you never want to do. No matter what you're doing, if you're conducting audit, be that externally or internally, you need to make sure that the user experience isn't impaired in any way. The website cannot be slow because of the crawling, and which is the reason why crawling can take for a really long time. 5 URLs per second tends to be a good pace, but at times we crawl with 1 URL per second, and you have to live with that. Give it the time that is really necessary in order to crawl the critical mass.
So if it's a 50 million page website,
it takes a bit of time, right?
Yeah, you'll be doing that for a year or something.
With the large websites, large in my book being maybe, starting, say, 50 million. 15 million is already very, very substantial, but, what you would probably consider the giants, particularly in the retail area. It does take time. If it's one-off engagement, of course, there are several weeks run-up time where you're just continuously crawling in order to get the data that you need. It doesn't have to be 100% sample, but it needs to be representative enough.
I'm curious, are you using Link Detox from linkresearchtools.com as part of your tool set?
I'm a big fan of the operator of link detox, but we're not utilizing the tool itself. We're tapping into the data source, but we're not relying on the analysis itself. And Christoph is very, very cool, of course. And if he sees that, I hope he does. I want to say Link Research Tool is very, very cool. I'm very much hoping they're going to reintroduce the annual event that they were offering in Vienna. I'd love to be part of that. We're not passing any judgment in terms of, not utilizing Link Research Tools on the detox analyzer. The reason for us doing it differently is because we have our own tools and we rely to a large extent while pre-filtering on the instinct gained over our 10 years, respective 10 years working at Google. It turns to be a very reliable method as far as we're concerned.
I know we're getting close to the end of time here, but I think it's important to clarify for our listener is when a disavow file is going to potentially be helpful and when it's not. So there's a manual penalty, link penalty, and you upload a disavow file. Well, that's a good action to take. But what about if there's an algorithmic adjustment?
You kept the nuclear question for the very end, because as much as I would love to give our audience a hopeful outlook and the answer we all strive for, the honest answer really is there is no way of telling in advance. I've seen everything. Frequently there is plateauing, but it's not a given. I've seen websites actually decline and lose traffic and lose organic visibility upon submitting the disavow file. And I have seen the opposite. I also want to say that because this is the more optimistic and the preferred course of action, that websites benefit from the single action, nothing else done, from the single one action, which is disavowing backlinks that were deemed to be in violation with Google Webmaster Guidelines, and subsequently the websites being much more visible for relevant queries. Unfortunately, there is no way of predicting that. I have never seen a tool that can do that. There is a risk, unless there is a penalty. Submitting a disavow file should be a lower than P0 priority. So it shouldn't be the first thing to do. And frequently, and backlinks is a big topic. I happen to be talking about backlinks at conferences recently quite a lot. Seems to be popular. Backlinks is a great topic. They can be obviously beneficial. There are various ways of dealing with backlinks and how backlinks can be built in more or less safe ways. We won't be able to address all of the fine nuances of link building today. But I want to say one thing. Most websites out there can very well do without any link building or without any backlinks, matter of factly speaking. There is bigger fish to fry. Very frequently, technical signals, user signals, which can be very nicely fine-tuned, are literally the bigger fish to fry, the bigger return of investment if we apply finite resources. One of my favorite things to look at in Google Search Console is sorting traffic over an extended period of time, looking for high impression landing pages that have very low CTR. In turn, indicating that user expectations are not met, that users happen to be very reluctantly clicking on those landing pages. Because this is almost low-hanging fruit. If we happen to experiment and improve those snippets, not across board, not if you happen to have 150 landing pages, you can do that across board, but you can pick and choose a few that already are very visible, but where users don't click on it. You can improve the snippets, test around, and see if you can tap into that reservoir of traffic that is already there for the taking. So there is bigger fish to fry in my book than backlinks, even though they can be very, very important. There are simply more signals than just traffic or just technical signals or just content signals. They all play a factor. They tend to affect each other as well. And it's a good advice not to focus on just one exclusively as we go ahead and optimize a website.
But there must have been occasions where you've had a client submit a disavow file and then they've lost traffic organically.
Yes, of course. That can happen. Our clients come to us and say, we have submitted this disavow file, and why is this happening to us? And we had already business partners in the past where the disavow file included both Google and our own website as a pattern. These things happen intentionally or not. Very frequently they can be undone. At times they can be correlated, but as much as we would love to be able to predict, which direction is it going to go? Are we confidently predict it's going to be go an upwards or downwards trajectory? It's not something where we can with confidence say, yeah, we are absolutely sure this is the way it's going to be going.
But in the case where the traffic has gone down after submitting a disavow file, Do you then remove the disavow file or update it or just leave it alone? What's the next action?
Well, this depends. If we happen to be the party building the disavow file, we generally tend to have a very high level of confidence. But then again, we would not recommend to submit the disavow file initially before all the hard work has been done, unless there is a penalty in place. Now, if there is a penalty in place, it has to be, if the penalty is link related, the disavow file has to stay in place. Simply put, if it's removed, the penalty is most likely to reappear again, and we basically have to start from scratch. And there is the waiting game again, because reconsideration request is a manual process. There is no confirmed turnaround time whatsoever. At times it takes a couple hours. Other days, it takes weeks or even months. So this is a huge risk. I do not recall off the top of my head a situation where, without a penalty in place, submitting the disavow file was on top of the list, because it never is. It really is a low priority.
What does that mean? It's something to not do? Do you recommend that a client not submit a disavow file if there's no message in Google Search Console of a link penalty?
It depends. Sometimes we do recommend to maintain the disavow file in case it's needed. If the website fails to rank for relevant queries where they have the relevant content, we may suggest to them to submit the disavow file nonetheless, but it is never the P0. It is never the top priority on the list. If the priority, which is the topic we started our conversation with, perfectly rounding up our conversation, if the priorities are actually embraced, if the technical signals are fine-tuned, if the content signals are unambiguous, any potential loss from submitting to this disavow file can be offset with the improved signals. This is the reason why priority is so important. Again, there are no guarantees. There is no way of telling a client, it's going to go one way or the other. But generally speaking, the upwards trajectory is, of course, the objective. And if we keep an eye on the order of things, on the order of battle, if you want, the order of the SEO battle, if that's something that we keep an eye on and embrace, typically the trajectory is a desirable one, up and to the right.
So what happens if you need a Google Insider to press a button or move something along and you haven't gotten any action yet? Do you pick up the phone and call John Mueller or Gary Eish or somebody else inside of Google that you know? Or what do you do?
I would love to say yes. I suppose that would further boost our sales, but the honest answer is no. We maintain contacts other than John and Gary. There is still a handful of people that I had the privilege to work with at Google, visiting there occasionally, going for the free lunch. Again, growing up in southern Germany, you never say no to a free lunch. I refrain from really disclosing any information from a client. To begin with, there is an NDA, of course. You never talk about the client outside contractual obligation. So we don't do that. And secondly, simply put, I do not believe that any of my former colleagues would actually go ahead and say, you know what, I know you so well, let's forget about that penalty, or let's push that button that we talked about. That's just never going to happen. I think even the attempt would rather shatter those networks and those relationships that we built over years. Unfortunately, we don't do that. We don't have that special channel while we maintain those contacts. We don't have that special channel where we can say, come on, guys, help us out here. Luckily, in my experience, it's not needed.
Yeah. Awesome. So if our listener wants to work with you guys, technical audit or some sort of ongoing engagement, how do they get in touch?
That's perfectly simple. You go to searchbrothers.com. That's one way to get in touch. The other, of course, is come and talk to us, either myself or Philly Visa, if we happen to run into each other at one of the conferences that are upcoming. Luckily, the conference season is in full swing. 2020 was a difficult year for conference speakers. 2021 wasn't really still. Previous year and this year is really, really good. I very much look forward to many conferences in the future to come. If we have the chance to talk face to face, let's do that. Otherwise, drop us a line and we will be glad to have the conversation and see if we can help each other.
All right. Thanks very much, Kaspar, and thank you, listener. We'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.